Steve will get over there with me. Good. Work them cards.
Welcome to the first meeting of the Sandusky City Commission, 2022. We'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Harris, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'll start things off by quoting Denzel Washington. It says, "To get something you've never had, you have to do something you never did." Les Brown, a motivational speaker, he made an analogy about this and said, "Imagine you're on your deathbed and standing around you are the ghost representing your unfulfilled potential, the ghost of the ideas you never acted on, the ghost of the talents you didn't use. That said, Father God, I ask that as a governing body of this great city, that you continue to instill in us the courage, foresight, and wisdom to help propel this city and its constituents forward so that we indeed reach our greatest potential. Amen."
Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, here.
Jolly? Yes. Mr. Waddington?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Meinzer?
Here.
Mr. Poole?
Can I have a motion to excuse Commissioner Poole?
So,
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion without objection. The motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved, and Commissioner Poole is excused. Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting of December 27th, 2021. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the December 21st meeting, dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion without objection. The motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion to approve those minutes is approved. This pandemic continuing to rage throughout Erie County. Once again, we will only receive comments from the public in written or email form. Ms. Myers, do you have any public comments regarding tonight's agenda to share with us?
Yes, we have one from Sharon Johnson. The land bank is mentioned on the agenda, so I would like to take the opportunity to express a concern about why staff cannot place the land bank agenda and minutes up on the website like all the other committees do. I am getting a lot of resistance from staff after requesting a couple of times the documents be placed online in order to save everyone some time. First, I would like to see the agenda and documents before the meeting so I can follow along with what is being talked about in the meeting. Second, because the agenda and minutes are not posted, I had to ask for all the 2021 agendas and minutes. That meant that staff had to take the time to pull those off and print those documents for me. That seems a waste of precious time when they could be up online, and it's not very good efficiency of their time. Thank you for considering my request.
That question, we'll attempt to answer that question as we get to that piece of legislation. The next order of business is the nomination of both president and vice president of our commission for the next 2 years. Commissioners, I will ask for nominations first for the office of president of the City Commission.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
I would like to nominate Commissioner Brady as the president of the Sandusky City Commission.
Are there any other nominations for president? Anyone uncomfortable with a voice vote? We are prepared to do secret ballot. Commissioners, what is your pleasure?
I'm fine with it.
Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on that nomination, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
yes.
Thank you. I'm inclined to ask for a recount, but I won't do that. The record, I would like the record to reflect that that vote was unanimous, but I would also like the record to reflect that Commissioner Poole is not with us tonight.
Last year he said no.
Seriously, I want to thank each of you for your vote of confidence and continued support, and I want to assure each of you that I will try to continue to find the will of this commission, as elusive as it is sometimes. I will ask for nominations for the office of Vice President.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Meisner.
would nominate Mr. Murray for vice chairman.
Are there any other nominations for Vice President? Ms. Byers, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Murray is our Vice President. Next item is a public hearing on CDGB substantial amendment for fiscal year 2021. This hearing will be conducted by Ms. Groy, our program administrator, and even though we are limiting public attendance, there will be an opportunity for written questions to be submitted and oral questions from commissioners at the conclusion of Ms. Groy's presentation. I believe Ms. Groy is going to do this virtually. Ms. Groy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, wonderful. All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'm going to start out tonight is our CDBG substantial amendment for fiscal year 21. The program proposal is for one proposed amendment to the fiscal year 21 annual action plan. And that is to change the CDBG CV Small Business Assistance Program to a rental and mortgage subsistence payment program, as illustrated below in this graph, which shows the $150,000 that was originally budgeted moving to the rental and mortgage assistance payment program. So these funds must be used to prepare for and respond to the coronavirus or COVID-19. And the process for changing the fiscal year 2021 action plan requires that the substantial amendment process be followed. So for the program proposal, what is it and what is its purpose? The purpose is that the fiscal year 21 CDBG COVID Small Business Assistance Grant Program be amended to a rental and mortgage subsistence payment program. The purpose of this change is to assist residents who are in need and are facing homelessness. Many local businesses have previously received funding or have been offered the opportunity to apply through the city for COVID relief funds, while assistance to local residents has been limited. Under the proposed program, those who qualify could receive up to 3 months of rent and/or mortgage assistance. The applicant must show that they live within the limits of the city of Sandusky and are facing homelessness due to COVID. One of my last slides, how will it work? The program will be administered through a third-party contractor. The contractor staff will collect the intake forms and manage the program. They will use 10% of the $150,000 to support their administration of the program, while the remaining funds will be directed to eligible residents. Staff estimates that approximately 100 to 150 persons will be assisted by the program, and that funding will be spent within 6 months of the program's kickoff. And the program should begin in early 2022. There was one comment received from Mr. Schwanger, which was dated December 10th of 2021. He stated that he had concern about the CAC, which is the Community Action Commission, only taking applications virtually, and that not everyone has access to a computer. So in response to Mr. Schwanger's comments, I'd like to say that there will be hard copies available for applicants, and they'll be available at City Hall and through the contractor's office as requested. And that concludes the presentation. If anyone has any questions or comments, below is my contact information.
Thank you, Ms. Groy. What an excellent use of these funds. Commissioners, questions or comments for Ms. Groy?
Mr. Chairman, I had a question for Nicole. Nicole, is there a cap on how much will be given to each applicant?
No. not at this time.
So it's kind of a floating amount, right?
Yes, there's the $150,000 minus the administrative money, and the rest of it will be used. There isn't a cap yet, but we can
Okay.
make one once we get to that.
No, I just wondered. Thank you.
Sure.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meiser?
did I read there was a 3-month limit though, correct?
Yes,
That's correct.
yeah.
Okay. 3-month limit on rent.
And
Yes, correct.
Commissioner Pajali.
One other question, Mr. Chairman. Nicole, do you know if it's one time only? If you get funded for the 3 months, can you come back in later on in the year and get funded again?
I believe it's one time only. Again, we'd have to put it in the language
Okay.
application.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Harris.
Nicole, could you please just provide us maybe just like with a bullet point or two as far as like what some of the general criteria might be that might make one eligible for this program? Like, is it, for instance, X amount of weeks or months, they've been laid off or, X or a period of time in which they're behind on their rent or mortgage?
So the main thing that they have to show is that they've been impacted by COVID for some reason. Say somebody loses their job because they have COVID and they have to be in quarantine. That's what they have to show. Something similar to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Additional questions or comments, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Weiser.
I just wanted to make sure that the small businesses are not being left out. I think there's other mechanisms for them to get funding that they're not being eliminated for any type of city help, correct, Mr. Witcher?
Through the commission president, Commissioner Meinzer, we, I do not believe this would eliminate them from any other program that we have, if that's the question that you're asking.
Yes.
So I mean, say I'm thinking like a service provider right now is hurting because their business is slow and they're getting laid off. And then, so there's the business is hurting as well. So I just wonder, does that business still have other mechanisms to try to get some COVID relief or some funding or whatever if they're looking at going under?
Through the commission president to Commissioner Meinzer, I do not believe any business would be ineligible. We do continue to have economic development programs from the city that we recapitalized as our budget came back last year. And we did do a big round of about $180,000 towards small business at the beginning of COVID.
Okay.
But we could certainly look at relief for small businesses in the future. I don't think that would mean that there would be less need for the type of rental assistance that Ms. Grohe is speaking about tonight, though. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Witzer, did I read somewhere that the demand wasn't that great for the 150, and that's why the transfer was going to take place?
through the commission president to Commissioner Pajali, I do believe we thought both that there was more individual need and that we weren't seeing the demand for those funds based on Cdgb restrictions can tend to be greater and more burdensome on businesses than they can be on residents. And so when we have more flexible funds for businesses, we tend to deploy local funds there because of that level of complexity. So yes.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, I'll declare this public hearing closed. Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff recommending various legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
It's been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, we have 7 items on the consent agenda this evening. Ms. Myers, will you present the consent agenda, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Item A, ratify grant submission for the Cleveland Road Safety Improvement Project. Item B, accepting 4 parcels into the land bank. Item C, sale of land bank property on Harrison Street. Item D, Erie County Board of Development Disabilities Agreement for Transportation Services. Item E, substantial amendment to fiscal year 2021 one-year action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Program. Item F, amending resolution number 041-21R and permission to bid a modified Cdgb fiscal year 21 demolition number 2 project. Item G, Housing Revolving Loan Fund Administration Agreement with the State of Ohio Department of Development.
Commissioners, having heard these items, do any of you wish to move any of these consent agenda items to the regular agenda? Having heard these ordinances and resolutions, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
make a motion to accept the consent agenda items A through B, and declaring that all ordinances and/or resolutions as drafted and presented to the city commission under the consent agenda shall take effect in accordance with section 14, or with section reflected in the ordinance and/or resolutions, whether it be in accordance with section 13 or 14 of the city charter. Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Jolly?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the ordinances and resolutions.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Those ordinances and resolutions are passed. We will turn to our regular agenda. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 1, please?
Item 1, it's requested an ordinance be passed making general appropriations for the fiscal year 2022 and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter, and this is the second reading.
Commissioners, as this is the second reading, we do not need a motion. I will open it up for discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the ordinance, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 2, please?
It's requested a resolution be passed declaring the necessity for the city to proceed with the proposed wastewater treatment plant emergency backup generator repair project, approving the specifications and engineer's estimate of costs thereof, directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 3, please.
It's requested a resolution be passed declaring the necessity for the city to proceed with the proposed Meg Street reconstruction and multi-use path project, approving the specifications and engineer's estimate of costs thereof, directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meinzer.
I move for the adoption of this resolution under accordance of full, I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. That concludes our regular agenda. We'll turn to our city manager for his report.
Good evening, Commissioners, and any staff or audience watching from home. I'll start with the donations. First, a donation of $100 for the K-9 account was received from John and Becky Stock in the memoriam of Nancy Keller. I'd ask for a donation to, or motion to accept that
So
donation.
moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved with our thanks.
Next, a donation of $25 for the K-9 account was received from Jackie Wechter in memoriam of Nancy Keller. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved again with our thanks.
An anonymous donation of $1,000 was also received for the K-9 account. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved for our thanks for that $1,000 donation.
A donation of $1,000 for the K-9 account was received from the Russell Classic Cancer Fund. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved again for $1,000.
A thank you to Target for the donation of $500 to the Sandusky Police Department. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved to Target for their donation of $500.
And then finally, a thank you to the several other businesses and community members who donated food, cookies, and snacks over the holidays to the Sandusky Police Department. Moving on to new and old business for Public Works, the variable frequency drive for Pump 5 at Big Island failed on December 17th. Staff would like to procure a replacement VFD along with installation, electrical work, programming on an emergency basis for up to $100,000. The VFD alone is estimated to be around $60,000 and was scheduled to be replaced with other drives at BIW later this year. Legislation will be prepared for a future meeting once final price is known. I'd ask for a motion for that emergency purchase.
So moved.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Also, public comments are being accepted via the city's website for the Monroe Street reconstruction project from Meigs to Decatur. This is required by the source of the grant funding, and all comments are due by Friday, January 21st. And finally, for Public Works, last year was the final sewer and water rate increase needed for implementation of the existing EPA required plans and regulations, as well as for standard improvements to aging water and sewer infrastructure. We're excited to announce that we will not need a rate increase for 2022. And then finally, for general information, a community warming shelter will be open tonight at 7 p.m. at New Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church due to the impending cold temperatures. New Jerusalem is doing that in partnership with Firelands Regional Health System. Information about future openings of the warming center will be posted on the city's Facebook page and at www.cityofsandusky.com/warming shelter. To volunteer for the shelter, please call Dora Grant at 419-204-2201. And a thank you again to Firelands Health, New Jerusalem, city staff, and especially Dora for pulling this together for members of our community in need. That concludes my remarks for this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions or take comments from the commission.
Questions or comments for the city manager, commissioners? If not, we'll move to old business. I would ask for a motion to accept the city manager's employment evaluation in its present form. Can I have a motion for that?
So moved.
So moved.
Got a motion and a second discussion? Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed, and his evaluation is accepted. Any additional items of old business, commissioners? Items of new business. Any items of new business?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
since we have the warming shelter open again this year, I'd like to make a motion for, that the city, we donate $500 to Dora Grant for the New Jerusalem church that's opening, for supplies. And I talked to her today, this afternoon again, and they have donations from various vendors for pizza and that for tonight. But going forward, maybe she could get water, hand wipes, various things like that she could use there, especially with this virus, going on right now. So,
Can I have a second for that motion?
I'll second that. Thank
I
you.
have a motion and a second discussion.
Thank you.
I will only, under the discussion phase of that motion, I will only say if they run out of supplies after $500, come back again, because it is money well spent.
Yeah.
Additional discussion? Ms. Myers, will you call roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed, and the $500 should be on their way. Any additional items of new business?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I probably should ask Mr. Webster, the city manager, when he was up here, when he brought up about the water contract. I recently shared that with Commissioner Pajali last week, that it ended on 12/31 as far as increases. And I know there's no increases this year. Are we looking, do we have enough going forward that we could look to the next 2-3 years? Do we have enough, I guess, in the piggy bank or enough coming in now with the several increases that we had? So I know a lot of families do struggle with that cost right now.
Through the commission, to Commissioner Waddington, I'd have to defer to Director Klein and Director Reeder, who I know are working closely on that. We know our goal is to limit or mitigate any increases that we'd have to do over the next few years, but I couldn't make a recommendation to the commission tonight that we could do a moratorium. I don't know if either Director Klein or Director Reeder want to speak to that, but we certainly could do some work quickly and come back to the commission with where we see the health of the funds, the required projects that are upcoming, and see. But we know we're all working really hard to keep without or very limited rate increases in the near future. So
I don't want to put our city engineer on the spot with trying to answer that question. I won't speak for him, but I think we all deserve that answer. We all get answers from our constituents regarding water rates. I will remind you, I probably don't need to remind you, commissioners, that we got into this mess because we went a decade without increasing rates. That does not give us a free hand to increase them every year, but I would ask Director Klein to provide us with that information on his look forward for, say, the next 3 or 4 years. It's hard to predict what we're going to be required to do by the EPA, which drive a lot of those increases. But I think Director Klein can give us some feedback at our hopefully at our very next meeting to shed some light on that good question, Mr. Waddington. Additional comments? Any additional items of new business? I have a little housekeeping here, sticking very close to home. I need a motion to reappoint Mr. Dennis Murray Sr. to our cemetery board. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, would you poll the commission on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray? Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
That motion is passed, and Mr. Murray Sr. is reappointed to the cemetery board. Any additional items of new business, commissioners? Ms. Myers, are there any written communications or from residents on any item affecting city business?
Yes, we did receive one. It is from Rick Scheel. Many of us has been anxiously awaiting for the J.C. Park Ice Arena to open for 2022 winter season. Last week at the Jackson Street Pier, a city worker told me that the J.C. Park Arena would not be made ready until after Martin Luther King Day, which is on January 18th. His questions are, 1, why the delay? Both Huron and Port Clinton have a real ice for skating. Number 2, I'm told it was dedicated hydrant for filling the J.C. Park rink has been broken for several years. Has that been addressed? Number 3, has the city considered either painting or lining the rink with a white or lighter color as opposed to the current black in order to counteract or reflect the heat generated from solar radiation? I have attached a picture of the arena in Huron as an example. Thank you for your time.
I'll ask Mr. Whirling to reach out to Mr. Schill and provide answers to those several questions regarding the skating rink. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.